She said I was nothing but a charity ticket that made my husband look progressive. She didn't whisper it. She said it to my face in the middle of our 8th wedding anniversary party, the one I had planned down to every last detail. I, Evelyn Monroe, stood there, surrounded by champagne flutes and a string quartet playing canon in D as my husband's mistress looked me straight in the eye, smiled like she'd already won, and said, "Bradley only married you so he could look more diverse in the media." I didn't cry. I didn't shatter a glass. I just looked at her and smiled. If you've ever been the woman they praise in public but never truly see, if you've ever loved, sacrificed, stayed silent, thinking family is everything, then maybe this story isn't just mine. Maybe it's ours. Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below. And if this moment feels familiar to you, go ahead and like this video, because what happened after that smile will send chills down your spine. Some women, when they go quiet, are not giving up. They're preparing to change the entire game. I returned to the party, as if nothing had happened, still holding my wine glass in my right hand, my left gently resting on guests' backs, nodding, offering polite smiles. But in my head, everything was shattering, like crystal under a stiletto heel. No one knew, not even Bradley, that I had just been insulted to the bone. In the very house I had turned into a paradise for him. On the very night meant to celebrate our love, and he was still out there, laughing with his elite friends, holding a glass fuller than his heart. They didn't see it. But you do, don't you? How a woman stands tall even when her spirit is cracked. How elegance becomes the last armor between her and collapse. I know many women out there have been just like me, swallowing shame for their kids, for dignity, for pride. But there's one thing that Mistress didn't know. I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because I was planning. And that plan? It started the next morning. They saw me through glossy magazine photos, the graceful smile, the Cartier bracelet, the Vera Wang silk gown, standing beside Bradley as some symbol of success and diversity. But they knew nothing about the real Evelyn. No one knew I wrote my first line of code at 13, that I got into MIT on a full scholarship. No one knew my father, Professor Monroe, left me a legacy of technology the world had never seen. And I placed it neatly in my husband's hands, trusting he would protect it for me. I used to believe love meant sacrifice. I chose family over career, chose to be a wife, a future mother, a piece of the portrait he wanted to paint. I thought that was love, but now I see it was a trap, a golden cage built with reputation, wealth, and obedience. If you've ever left parts of yourself behind for love, I want you to stay with me through this story, because in just a few hours, I will begin to reclaim everything, and I won't be doing it alone. The next morning, when the sunlight wasn't yet warm enough to dry the memory of the night before, I woke up alone. Bradley still asleep beside me, his breathing steady, as if it had all been just another ordinary evening, as if he didn't know his wife had been publicly humiliated in their own home. I stood by the wide glass window, staring into the perfectly manicured garden, a breathtaking space, and also the place where I had learned to hold my breath to survive. For 8 years, I had learned to choose silence over resistance, to become Mrs. Kingsley instead of Evelyn Monroe, to become a symbol instead of a person. But the truth is, I never belonged here, not in any dress, not behind any smile, and certainly not next to the man still asleep, convinced I would always stay, obedient and agreeable. Have you ever lived in a house where you weren't allowed to be yourself? Because that morning, when I walked out the door, I wasn't anyone's wife anymore. I was myself again, and the first thing I did was call someone Bradley never imagined I'd dare to hire. I dialed the number. No hesitation, no trembling. My voice was calm, clipped. A command. I need you to find out everything about Bradley Kingsley. Everything. On the other end of the line, Marcus Chen, the best private investigator in Manhattan, didn't ask why. He just said, "I've been waiting for this call." Marcus was the shadow in the spotlight world of the elite. He didn't show up at galas. He wasn't on Forbes lists, but he had made some of the most powerful people back down, silently. I didn't hire him to catch Bradley cheating. I knew he was betraying me, physically, emotionally, professionally. What I wanted was the truth. Every number, every wire transfer, every hidden clause in million-dollar contracts I had been excluded from. I didn't just want to leave, I wanted to know what I was walking away from, and take back exactly what had been stolen from me. Do you know that feeling? When you're no longer afraid to lose, but ready to take back what's yours. Marcus gave me 3 weeks, but what he didn't know was, in just 2 weeks, I would uncover something even bigger than betrayal. Two weeks later, Marcus placed a leather briefcase on my table. No unnecessary words. No pity in his eyes. Just one sentence. "You should read this alone." I opened it, page by page, photo by photo, line by line. It wasn't proof of an affair. It was a blueprint for systemic betrayal. Bradley hadn't just deceived me for one night. He'd been doing it for years, for a decade. Every business trip was a luxury getaway with a mistress. Every strategic investment was a wire transfer to another woman he'd slept with. And there, my name, listed in reports as a PR cost for the Kingsley Tech brand's humanitarian image. I wasn't a wife. I was a prop. And then I saw another document, marked in red, Intellectual Property Source, Dr. Everett Monroe, father-in-law. It wasn't just my heart he betrayed. It was my father's legacy, something I believed had been preserved out of love, used as personal property to build an empire. Have you ever been betrayed not just by a man, but by your own decision to trust him? Leave a comment below if you know that feeling. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and when I opened them again, I knew the game had just begun. And this time, I was playing to win. I stared at the contract copy signed 8 years ago. My signature, neat and composed, sat beneath a clause granting Bradley full control of my father's intellectual property after his death. Signed in tears. Signed while still in mourning. Signed because I believed a husband would protect what his father-in-law left behind, just like he'd promised at the altar. But now it was clear. He hadn't protected the legacy. He exploited it, used it as a ladder to the top. And me, Everett Monroe's only daughter, the PhD candidate who almost was, the engineer who once built an AI algorithm to help detect early-stage cancer. I had been reduced to a background character in the success story of a white man being praised. I sat still, but inside a fire was burning. Not pain anymore, but clarity. No longer, why me? Now, what will I do with this truth? I closed the file and began drafting the first page of a new plan. Its title, Rebirth. I needed a team, not lawyers, not journalists. I needed people who knew me before I became Mrs. Kingsley. Before the gowns, before the magazine covers, before I was turned into a display statue for performative progress. I opened an old folder on my laptop. A list of 23 names appeared. Kids I once taught to code for free in a small back room behind a church in Brooklyn. Boys of color once labeled hopeless. I didn't just teach them to code, I taught them how to rewrite their futures. And now they had grown up. Software engineers at Google, cybersecurity leads at Cisco, AI developers for NASA. All of them once called me Ms. Evelyn, and after just one short email, the replies started coming in. If you need me, I'm there. You believed in me when no one else did. Maybe you know this too. Sometimes we lift others without realizing it. And one day they return and lift us. If you've ever quietly helped someone, and now they're your reason to rise, comment below, I believe in planting seeds. Because the seeds I planted have become a forest, and that forest was getting ready for its first battle. Monroe Future Labs. I handwrote that name on the first blueprint. Not Kingsley, not Evelyn and Co., but Monroe. My father's name, my name, and the name of every dream that drowned when I chose to be a wife instead of a leader. This wasn't a revenge business, it was a quiet uprising. A tech initiative rooted in intellect, waving the flag of justice. We weren't building to compete, we were building to expose. Expose what had been polished by media, but rotted at the moral core. I no longer needed a seat beside a powerful man. I was building the room, and inviting in those who had never been given a key. I remembered what Bradley once told me. No one wants to invest in a black woman with no leadership record. He was wrong. They will invest. When they see fire in my eyes, and ruins in his hands. And the name Monroe, it was coming back, not in a headline, but on the stock exchange. While Bradley still lived in the illusion that he was the center of the world, I was quietly rebuilding an entire ecosystem behind his back, layer by layer, strategy by strategy. He still slept peacefully in his Italian silk sheets, still took his new mistress on Napa getaways, still graced the cover of Tech Vision as a visionary genius. But he had no idea that the employees working in his satellite firms, his joint ventures, his precious VC circles, were my former students. We said nothing, no threats, no headlines. We simply reclaimed, in the language he thought I'd never speak, money, data, market share, trust. I read every internal report, every leaked email, every contract signed with arrogance. I studied. I analyzed. I remembered every pillow talk he thought I was too naive to understand. And then I discovered that very empire he built was hiding a legal bomb, and it would take just one finger to set it off. I didn't need to shatter it. I just needed to touch the right nerve, and I had just found it. I found it buried inside an encrypted audit file. What seemed like routine financial data turned into something much darker as I followed the code and digital signatures. Bradley hadn't just used my father's patent to build Kingsley Tech's core software. He had sold unauthorized licenses to international partners, without the board or any regulatory body ever knowing. Millions of dollars funneled into anonymous accounts, the clauses disguised through shell companies owned by his old mistresses. And, most damning, not a single line acknowledged me, the sole legal heir to the tech system's original architecture. This betrayal wasn't personal anymore. It was structured. It was intentional. It was criminal. I sat in front of the screen, the flickering light of stolen data reflecting in my eyes. I had once loved this man, believed he was good enough to protect my father's dream. But that dream had been turned into a money machine, soiled by greed, wrapped in an Italian suit. I hit print, the first copy, for someone who could shake his empire in silence. That person had just agreed to meet me. I walked into my lawyer's office on a cold, rainy Wednesday, the kind of rain that makes all of New York hold its breath with you. The woman sitting across from me was Sandra Lee, an expert in intellectual property and corporate fraud investigation. Not famous, not fond of publicity, but once she walks into a room, even CEOs hesitate before signing anything. I laid the file on her desk. No small talk, no emotion, just one question. Can we prove the entire core technology of Kingsley Tech was stolen property? Sandra flipped through each page. Her expression never changed, only grew colder. 10 minutes later, she looked up. If what's in here is true, it's not just theft, it's federal fraud. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt light. Light because finally, the truth had a name. 8 years of being a symbol, a stage prop for media approval. Now I was ready to step down, not to disappear, but to bring the stage down with me. And when it collapsed, the first person to fall wouldn't be Bradley. It would be the one now living in my old bedroom, Scarlet Haven. Her name sounded like a perfume label, and she lived like one. Every step a performance, every smile a calculation. Just 3 days after Bradley filed for divorce, Scarlett officially moved into the mansion I had spent 7 years turning into a home. She didn't keep a single thing. The curtains were replaced. The bed changed. Even the piano I used to play with my father, gone without a word. Scarlett hadn't just taken my husband. She erased me, like I never existed. She posted a photo holding a wine glass in the bedroom where I once read books, with the caption, "New Beginnings with Brilliance." But what she didn't know was that the floor beneath her was already cracking, and I held the blueprint of every single fracture. I didn't need to pull her hair, I didn't need tabloids or drama, I just needed the right moment. Because Scarlett believed she had everything. But what she didn't know, the very thing keeping Bradley was the same thing destroying him. And me? I was already too far away to be hurt, but close enough to strike. A week later, I got a call from Bradley's own attorney. His voice was calm, almost kind. Bradley wants to keep things civilized. He's prepared a very generous divorce settlement. Generous. I smiled. Silently. The generous offer included $10 million and a beachfront house in Malibu, a place I had no memory of because he never once invited me there. We met on the 42nd floor of a glass office, sunlight slanting across his expensive silver suit like it was blessing the victor. He pushed the file across the table like it was a favor. "You'll be fine. This is a new beginning for both of us. Let's keep things light." I looked him straight in the eye, smiled, nodded. "Thank you, Bradley. I know you've always wanted what's best for me." He exhaled, relieved. He thought I'd surrendered. But the truth is, the moment I signed that agreement, I also finalized my term sheet with an investment fund preparing to pour $50 million into Monroe Labs. And that moment was the true beginning of the game. Scarlett moved into the mansion officially on a Saturday. A soft, sunny morning. Innocent on the surface. She arrived with 3 Louis Vuitton suitcases, a bouquet of white peonies, and the strut of someone who believed she had won. She posted a photo in satin, leaning against the same window where I once wrote letters to my father. My old bedroom now carried the heavy scent of conquest. While I was in San Francisco, in a strategy roundtable with 3 senior investors from Japan, the UK, and Atlanta. I didn't look back. No pain. No regret. I was once the woman mopping floors after the parties my husband hosted. Now I was finalizing the IPO roadmap for a tech firm valued 3 times higher than Kingsley Tech. They moved into my old home with wine, jazz, and the illusion that I had retreated. But I was sitting beside an SEC attorney discussing intellectual property enforcement. They were building a new home. I was building an investigation. And I knew. The first collapse wouldn't come from the press, it would come from the stock exchange. Three weeks after signing that generous agreement, the market began to murmur. No headlines, no scandals, just anomalies. A series of financial reports from Kingsley Tech no longer aligned with the data disclosed in their IPO filing 3 years ago. An independent audit team, coincidentally tipped off by an anonymous source, began reviewing every tax disclosure line by line. Then, an internal memo from the legal department leaked onto a private investor forum, suggesting Kingsley Tech may have severely violated intellectual property law, with core technology they didn't actually own. No one knew the name Evelyn Monroe. Not yet. I remained in the background, zooming into meetings, signing documents under Monroe Future Labs, but I could see it. The cracks in Bradley's glass empire widening. Through numbers, through legal files, through the very thing he had always underestimated. Evidence. No guns, no gossip, just the market, turning. And when Wall Street smells blood, it doesn't ask who's right. It only asks who's weak. And this time, it's not me. Monday, 9 a.m. The NASDAQ opened like any other day, but Kingsley Tech was no longer the name people clapped for. The stock began to drop. Not in a crash, but in a steady, rhythmic decline, like a heart losing its signal. I was sitting on the 17th floor of a glass building in San Jose. Behind me hung a freshly installed banner for Monroe Future Labs. In front of me sat legal advisors, PR strategists, and 3 new assistants, all of them former students who once learned to code sitting on a church floor in Brooklyn. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply watched. Meanwhile, in the Manhattan penthouse, Bradley's phone lit up nonstop. The CFO called, in-house counsel called, the media called, and then the SEC called. I knew the exact moment he received the email titled, "Preliminary Investigation Initiated. Intellectual Property Fraud Allegation." The mansion that once echoed with glory now rang with panicked footsteps. Scarlett walked into the room just in time to see Bradley slam his laptop against the wall. No one knew what was happening, but I did, and I hadn't touched a single thing. I had simply unlocked the truth. And when truth is set free, it doesn't need me to lead it. It will burn everything down on its own. Bradley Kingsley wasn't used to losing control. He was the kind of man who made a shareholder withdraw with a single look. The media once called him the Wall Street version of Steve Jobs. He never had to explain, never had to apologize. Until that morning, when the phone slipped from his hand and landed on the carpet. And he didn't even bother to pick it up, because that email from the SEC wasn't a warning. It was a direct question. Does Kingsley Tech legally own the source code platforms listed in its IP portfolio? He called his lawyer, but the lawyer had no answer. He called Scarlett, but she couldn't even comprehend what was going on, because they all thought Evelyn had signed the divorce and disappeared. What they didn't know was that Evelyn Monroe never played to survive. She was silent, to take control. Bradley screamed all morning, demanding to find who's behind this. But he didn't realize there was no one behind. The person he should fear had stepped onto center stage and was about to speak her first line. I walked into a closed-door press briefing. No cameras, no reporters. Just representatives from 3 major investment funds and counsel from the Federal Intellectual Property Commission. In my hands was a thick file of verified evidence. Original patents under my father's name. Contracts forged by Bradley. Internal audit reports provided by former Kingsley employees. Transaction logs tracing money through shell companies. I didn't flinch. Because for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't speaking as someone's wife. I was speaking as a rightful heir, an engineer, a creator, a woman who had been robbed, and who had come back to claim what was hers. Do you believe that when a woman goes silent, she's given up? Yes. If you've never known better, no? If you understand that silence is sometimes just strategy loading, so, are you the kind of person who says yes or no? I placed the file on the table. The entire room went silent. And that was the moment. The man who thought he held all the power began to lose the entire stage. When I walked out of that room, no one clapped. No one congratulated me. Just silent eyes watching, like they had just seen a storm wearing a black suit. I didn't break down any doors. I simply brought the key and let them open it themselves. And they saw everything. Illicit funds flowing through international partnerships. Software licenses stripped of my name, as if I never existed. Above all, they saw a web of manipulation. Built not just with deception, but with utter contempt for the woman who once called him husband. I once loved that man. Once believed I was part of a shared dream. But now I knew. I was never his equal. I was the foundation he walked over, and when that foundation rises, the whole castle tilts. That afternoon, Monroe Labs received official confirmation. We had legal standing for both civil and criminal litigation. I only had to sign, and while I held the pen, Scarlett, still sitting in my former home, received a message from her lawyer. A message that would turn the silk dress she flaunted on Instagram into ashes in the public eye. Scarlett Haven stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom I once called my sanctuary, adjusting a soft strand of hair. She had just posted a new photo. Red silk dress, wine glass in hand, with the caption, "Power is a vibe." 12,000 likes in 2 hours. Then the notification came. A message from her lawyer. "Ms. Scarlett, we strongly advise you not to comment publicly. You are currently listed as a secondary subject in a federal financial fraud investigation." Her expression changed instantly. Because Scarlett was never obsessed with wealth, she cared about image. And now, her image was bound to a federal fraud case. The mansion was no longer a haven. Every item, every purse, every marble tile was subject to seizure if Kingsley Tech collapsed and Bradley faced prosecution. She called him 3 times. No answer. Scarlett thought she had claimed the throne, but she forgot what it was built on. And when that foundation is a lie, no matter how expensive the silk, it's just wet cloth in a hurricane. And the storm was far from over. I returned to the Hamptons estate nearly 3 months after I walked away. Not to cry, not to plead, but to verify a tiny legal clause Bradley, in his arrogant confidence, had completely overlooked. In our prenuptial agreement, buried deep was a small line that read, "Any real estate registered jointly within the first 3 years cannot be transferred without dual consent." The estate, Scarlett's so-called Queen's Castle, was still in my name. I didn't evict anyone. I simply filed a request to freeze the property due to an ongoing investigation. Within 24 hours, all credit cards linked to Bradley's accounts were suspended. Security staff was replaced. The estate's access codes were changed. Scarlett returned from a photo shoot and couldn't open the gate. She called Bradley, but at that moment, he was being held for preliminary questioning at a federal law office. I never showed up. I didn't need to, because those who thought I'd quietly walk away were starting to realize I never left the chessboard. I simply stepped back, to strike with precision, from executive offices to boardrooms, from legal war rooms to venture capital huddles. The name Evelyn Monroe began to echo as an unignorable variable. No longer Bradley Kingsley's ex-wife, no longer the quiet black woman behind the spotlight, but the one holding the original patent, the one who filed the official complaint to the SEC. The woman the finance world now called the countdown clock to Kingsley Tech's collapse. The media smelled blood. An article in The Atlantic posed the question, was Kingsley Tech's rise built on stolen intellectual property? Stock prices kept falling. Investors exited in waves. Scarlett was photographed by paparazzi leaving a budget hotel. No chauffeur, no smug smile. She dodged cameras like the world could now see right through the shell she'd built. And me, Evelyn. I didn't need to make a statement. I just kept working, quietly. Because by now, my presence alone was the loudest voice in the room, and deep down, I knew. Bradley was remembering the last time I smiled and said, "I know you've always wanted what's best for me." Because now, the best is exactly what's taking everything from him. Kingsley Tech officially hit the floor on Wednesday morning. The Bloomberg homepage ran a cold headline, "From Tech Icon to IP Suspect. The Bradley Kingsley Empire is crumbling." Investors pulled out. International partners announced temporary suspensions. A regional HQ in Singapore was locked down for audit. And domestically, the Federal Investigations Commission opened a case with 4 preliminary charges: fraudulent asset reporting, tax evasion, IP theft, forged licensing. Bradley, once the man who could make an entire boardroom rise just by walking in, now sat pale in a lawyer's office, fists clenched, words gone. Every excuse collapsed under the weight of the evidence I submitted, structured, detailed, airtight. For 8 years, I stood behind him, supporting, silent, obedient. But now, I didn't need blades or media. I just told the truth, and let it do the rest. Because the truth, as I'd always known, doesn't need to scream to be heard. It only needs someone brave enough to stop being afraid of it. And I had finally become that person. But this story? It's not over yet. 6 months after Kingsley Tech's historic fall, Monroe Future Labs was officially listed on the NASDAQ. No fireworks, no grand speeches. Just me, in a charcoal suit, hair neatly pinned, eyes locked on the ticker screen displaying my company's name, and my father's surname. Stock rose 17% on opening day. No one asked who I used to be married to. They asked, "Evelyn, what's your vision for expanding AI in education?" I stepped out of the shadow of a man who thought he was the light. I didn't win by revenge. I won by surviving, by building, by empowering those once deemed underqualified. Now, those same people were directors, advisors, engineers. At the company I founded, Bradley still awaited final charges. Scarlett had left New York, quiet, like she never existed. And me? I was working on a new project, transforming the mansion where I was once humiliated into something no one saw coming. Because when women stop waiting to be given power, they build entire new worlds, and that's exactly what I was about to do. I returned to the Hamptons estate once more, not to relive memories, but to end them and begin something new. The house, once a symbol of opulence and social currency, once filled with parties where I smiled while being slowly erased, was now hollow, cold, and cracked from ghosts that were never real. I stood in the grand foyer, where Scarlett once floated with red wine and Bradley toasted to love and legacy, and told the architects, "I want the entire second floor demolished. Open space, creative zones. I want a computer lab, a library. No adults allowed. Only children who were never told they could be exceptional." They stared, surprised, but didn't ask questions, because I wasn't speaking as a buyer. I was speaking as someone restoring justice. The old estate would become the Monroe Center for Young Innovators, a free tech hub for Black children, immigrant kids, kids like I once was. And the room that once made me feel small would now be the place where children realize they are big enough to change the world. But my journey wasn't done, because one person hadn't yet shown up. I was reviewing the final interior designs for the Monroe Center when the doorbell rang. No warning, no appointment. I walked out, and there she was, Scarlett Haven. No silk, no lipstick, no victory icon energy. Just a woman, hair loose, face hollow, eyes, finally humble. "Evelyn, I know I have no right to ask anything, but I have no one else to talk to." I didn't invite her in. We sat on the front steps, the same place where I once cried on our anniversary night as she walked past me like I didn't exist. Scarlett looked down, gripping her coffee like it was the last solid thing in her unraveling life. "Bradley. He's lost everything. The house, the company, friends, his name. He says, 'You destroyed him.'" I looked at her, calm, not angry, not cold, just honest. "No, Scarlett, I didn't destroy him. I just stopped holding him up." She went silent. Tears threatened. And for the first time, I saw Scarlett not as the mistress, the thief, but as a woman who once thought victory meant replacing someone else, now realizing that real power is knowing you never had to. And I knew I had to say one last thing, something to close the old chapter and open the door to a new one. We sat there under the shade of a porch that had once witnessed me being belittled, seen as nothing but a colored shadow. Now it held 2 women, once enemies, now sitting with only silence and truth between them. Scarlett didn't lift her head. I know you hate me. I deserve that. I never thought it would all end like this. I listened. I didn't interrupt. Because I once thought my life would end differently too. Perfect wife, proper woman, a framed portrait with a trained smile. But pain, betrayal, and being overlooked, they reminded me who I really was. I looked at her. Forgiving you doesn't mean I've forgotten. It just means I'm no longer letting what you did control me. She cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet sob of someone realizing their worth was never in a dress, a mansion, or a man. I placed my hand on her shoulder, light but firm, because forgiveness didn't make me weak, it made me free. And in that moment, I understood. The greatest victory isn't when others bow, it's when you rise, without needing them to fall. But what I was about to do next would be my final declaration. 6 months after my final conversation with Scarlett, I stood in the main hall of the Monroe Center for Young Innovators. White walls, natural light, the scent of new paper, new computers, and dreams no one had ever given permission to speak aloud. I didn't rebuild the old house, I demolished it. Then I built something entirely new, not to forget, but to transform. Here, there are no special seats for someone's son. No mirrors to check your look before class. Just giant screens, keyboards, mind maps, and the voices of kids once called underprepared. Every day, they learn to code, to program machines, but more importantly, to reprogram what they believe about themselves. I walked past a little girl leading her younger brother into class, her face glowing like she'd just touched a brand new world, and I saw myself in her, 13-year-old Evelyn, alone with a coding notebook and a hidden dream. I had come back to life, but not just for me, because what I lost wasn't just dignity, career, or love. It was the chance to pass on something right to those never chosen, and in this place, I needed no approval. I created value, so no one else would ever have to beg for the right to exist. Only one thing left to do, not for them, but for my father, and for me. I stood inside the memory room of the center, a quiet space where my recently awarded honorary doctorate hung, from the very university my father once taught at. Beneath it, a photo of him, Professor Everett Monroe, with the engraved words, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you ignite to continue." I touched the frame gently, no tears, just a smile, because at last I was no longer part of someone else's story. I had rewritten my own. Every step, every scar, every choice to not avenge with bitterness, but with strategic kindness. I didn't win because they lost. I won because I rose, in a way that made others want to rise too. And if you've made it this far, maybe you felt invisible before, overlooked, called too quiet, too old, too weak. But remember this, you are not invisible. You are just quietly preparing for your moment. Don't wait for permission. Start, even if you must start from ashes. If this story made you feel seen, please like this video, share it with a woman who deserves more, and subscribe to the channel for more journeys of rebirth and quiet power. Because when women tell their own stories, the world doesn't stay the same. And I believe you have a story like this too.